on this Tuesday night, putting a global price on pollution. The Prime Minister's pitch to the world.
It's an extremely powerful tool.
Plus, the countries refusing to join the pledge to slash methane emissions. The Blackhawks sex abuse scandal. The former assistant GM cleared, but still repentant.
Kyle was failed by a system that should have helped him.
The Taliban's rebrand.
They are not trustable.
Why Afghans aren't buying this softer side of a terrorist organization. To preserve and protect the young climate activists on a mission to create a better world.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin tonight in Glasgow with the push to protect the planet. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau urged his global counterparts at the UN Climate Conference to put a minimum price on carbon emissions. He's also backing a US and EU-led partnership to cut methane emissions by 2030. Methane accounts for 25% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. It's more potent than CO2 and it traps far more heat. The Global Pledge aims to reduce methane emissions by 30% compared with 2020 levels. Canada has joined nearly 100 countries in signing up for the initiative, but 3 of the world's top pollution powerhouses, China, Russia and India, did not commit to the agreement. Our Mike Couteur joins us from Glasgow, and Mike, guide us through what Canada is committing to.
Well, Robin, Canada supports the Global Methane Pledge and last month announced the government will develop a plan to reduce methane across the economy, including methane emissions from the oil and gas sector by at least 75% in the next 9 years. And today, Trudeau was adding to the Canadian ambition theme, urging world leaders to put a global price on pollution.
The carbon pricing is one of the most powerful ways of reducing emissions.
Once a controversial statement, today it's supported by some of the world's economic leaders. Joined by the head of the IMF, WTO, and European Commission, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made his pitch for a global price on pollution.
We should be ambitious and say, as of right here today, that we want to triple that. 60% of global emissions should be covered by a price on pollution in 2030.
Trudeau says pricing pollution is seen as the best way to keep global temperatures from rising more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. The biggest issue is equity. While action is needed, poorer countries can't afford to be as bold as others.
For poor countries, it is lower. For middle-income countries, somewhat higher. For rich economies, of course, they need to strive to pay more.
After an election where Canadian parties of all stripes agreed to put a price on pollution, Trudeau believes Canada can lead on this issue. In fact, our carbon price will rise to $170 per ton by the year 2030. But even big polluters like the U.S. have yet to price carbon federally. It's why environmental activists say Canada needs to go much further.
To say to the world that we're going to limit global warming to 1.5, well, Canada is not there. And so we do need those kind of measures that are going to complement what we've already done so far.
After serving as the head of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, Mark Carney, the current UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance, acknowledges policy changes are needed to effect more change.
Yes, it's complicated if any major jurisdiction doesn't have a price on carbon. However, I'd note the U.S. Intentions to have a clean grid by 2035.
To that end, Trudeau gave a concrete example of how change on a global scale is possible.
A few years ago, nobody would have even imagined that we could set a global minimum corporate tax. And suddenly we have.
Trudeau believes the same is true for pricing carbon, and he urged the world it's better to be a leader than be dragged behind. Robin?
Mike Couteur in Glasgow, Scotland. Thanks, Mike.
Let's end this great global chainsaw massacre.
110 nations, including Canada, are also vowing to end deforestation by 2030 and reverse the loss of forests. The countries signing on represent 85% of the planet's forested land. The agreement comes with a pledge of over $19 billion in public and private funds to help developing nations restore land that has already been degraded. Protecting the world's forests is key to reducing greenhouse gases and keeping global temperatures from rising above 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Forests, they store around 30% of the terrestrial carbon on the planet. Deforestation and conversion and agriculture, contributes around about 30% of all current climate emissions. So it's really, really critical.
A previous deal signed in 2014 failed to stop deforestation. Now to some breaking news out of the U.S. Advisors to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have unanimously recommended the Pfizer COVID vaccine for kids aged 5 to 11. There is now just one step left in the U.S. approval process. The director of the CDC must sign off on a recommendation. There are reports that could happen as early as tonight. The first shots could be administered to American kids as early as tomorrow morning. Pfizer has submitted an application to Health Canada for approval of its kids' vaccine in this country. That application is still under review. The Canadian government is expanding the list of airports accepting international flights. The government says starting November 30th, international flights will be allowed to land at 8 more airports across the country from St. John's to Victoria, BC. They'll join the 10 airports already authorized to accept flights from abroad. There's a new development tonight in the Chicago Blackhawks sexual abuse scandal. Winnipeg Jets general manager Kevin Cheveldayoff has spoken to the media for the first time about his connection to the allegations. Cheveldayoff was assistant general manager of the Blackhawks in 2010 when then-player Kyle Beach was allegedly assaulted by a video coach. An independent investigation found that Beach told management about the allegations and nothing was done. Cheveldayoff was at the management meeting where the allegations were discussed, but the NHL decided not to discipline him. They say he was not responsible for how the allegations were handled. Today, Cheveldayoff said he was unaware at the time of the extent of the allegations. He apologized to Beach for the system failing him.
What Kyle went through is unacceptable and intolerable. No one should ever have to go through what he went through. Kyle was failed by a system that should have helped him, but did not. I am sorry that I cannot change what took place or how the process was handled back then. But I can learn from this and make sure that this never happens again.
There will be no jail time for a teenager found guilty of sexual assault at Toronto's St. Michael's College. The judge sentenced the teen to 2 years probation for his role in the 2018 assault of another student at the all-boys school. In June, he was found guilty of the gang attack, which involved assaulting the victim with a broom. All 5 students who pleaded guilty to the same incident will not face jail time. There was a surprise move today by Ontario Premier Doug Ford. 3 years after scrapping plans to hike the minimum wage to $15, he is now doing exactly that. Ford says on January 1st, minimum wage will go from $14.35 an hour to $15 an hour. He says an estimated 760,000 workers will benefit.
For many Ontarians, wages haven't kept up with the increasing cost of living, making it harder than ever to make ends meet. I've always said workers deserve to have more money in their pockets because they earned it.
In 2018, after he won the provincial election, Ford canceled legislation that would have increased minimum wage to $15. Today, the official opposition NDP leader criticized Ford, saying $15 doesn't cut it, that workers need at least $17 to cover the cost of living. Now to the U.S., where 1 year after Joe Biden's victory, voting is once again underway in state and local races. Biden and former President Donald Trump are not on the ballot, but they're both central figures in states like Virginia, where the governor's race is now too close to call. Jackson Prosco is in Fairfax, Virginia tonight with why this race is crucial to the White House.
Hi, are you here you ready to vote? Virginia elections are normally safe territory for Democrats.
And with the recent last 4 years of Donald Trump, I didn't even bother looking at what the candidates were. I decided I was voting Democrat straight down to the bottom line.
This time around, the governor's race has turned into a nail-biter.
Wake up, Virginia, here we come. Let's bring this baby home.
Democrat Terry McAuliffe and Republican Glenn Youngkin are tied in the polls, with the election swayed by Joe Biden's growing unpopularity and the long shadow of former President Donald Trump.
I think because they're not pushing a Democratic policy, they're pushing a socialist policy, and I don't think people are I don't think that's why people live in America.
In recent weeks, Virginia Democrats have seen their support evaporate as Biden's agenda stalls.
America is watching this race.
Republicans have seized the opportunity to campaign against vaccine mandates and more progressive curriculums in schools, while Donald Trump weighs in from the sidelines.
The Republicans have lost in Virginia for 10 straight years. They're desperate to win one, and now conditions permit them to win. So their enthusiasm level is through the roof. Democrats are blasé about it.
The fact that the Virginia race is even close could spell trouble for Democrats nationwide, a sign voters have turned away 1 year before midterm elections.
I'd like to see everybody come together and be able to work together, but that's not where we're at right now.
Yet Virginia also offers clues about the limits of Donald Trump's future appeal should he try a comeback in 2024. Trump wasn't invited to campaign alongside Youngkin, but did endorse him. He remains both an asset and a liability to the party. Even though he's not on the ballot, Trump still looms large here. In fact, his lies about a stolen election in 2020 have forced a change in the way results will be reported out tonight, with mail-in and absentee results delivered first and in-person votes released later. Robin?
Jackson Brosco in Fairfax, Virginia. The Taliban's diplomatic dance to woo the world. But is this charm offensive enough to get the help this country needs? That's coming up. At least 20 people are dead after an attack on Afghanistan's biggest military hospital. 2 explosions hit the site in central Kabul. This is the latest in a string of killings since the Taliban takeover. No one has claimed responsibility. The United Nations warns Afghanistan is on the brink of becoming the world's worst humanitarian crisis. The country is desperate for foreign aid, and in an effort to win over the international community, the Taliban is trying to show a friendlier face. But few are buying that the terror group has changed its ways. Jeff Semple reports from Kabul, and a warning: some of the images in this story may be disturbing.
The Canadian embassy in Afghanistan sits abandoned, and it looks like staff left in a hurry. The Canadian government says it has no plans to return here to a country controlled by what it calls a terrorist organization. This is not an accurate definition of us. If they are saying we are a terrorist regime, Canada should behave more responsibly, said the Taliban's official spokesperson. The time for war is over. It's a new season. We want good diplomatic relations with Canada and all countries. After 20 years of fighting, the Taliban is launching a new charm offensive, posing for photographs and inviting foreign journalists to see a country it says is safer and free of corruption. People were only afraid of the Taliban because of Western media propaganda, says this deputy commander. We are fighting for the country. Afghans are not afraid anymore. The Taliban allowed us to monitor one of their patrols here on the streets of Kabul as the extremist group tries to project a friendlier face to the outside world. At the same time, it's also seeking international recognition and desperately needed foreign aid. The UN warns Afghanistan is on the brink of becoming the world's worst humanitarian crisis. The situation's so desperate, this family is selling one of their own children to buy food for the others. I'm required to say I'm happy with the Taliban, this man scoffs. The price of flour has doubled. Everyone is unemployed. We need help. The Taliban is hoping these scenes will persuade the international community to open their purse strings. But Canada and its allies fear empowering the Taliban to return to the medieval methods of its first rule, when women were prisoners in their own homes and Kabul's soccer stadium hosted public executions. Today, criminal cases are heard by this Taliban primary court. This man says a police officer from the former government killed his brother. The punishment for murder is death, the Taliban commander says. Asked what evidence was provided or whether the accused will be publicly executed, he declines to answer. We asked this commander if the Taliban has truly changed. A Muslim will never change his ideology. He will follow the Quran and Sharia law. But the Taliban is more skilled in politics than it was 20 years ago, he says. Some Afghans say that politically savvy Taliban is conducting its operations not under a stadium spotlight, but in the shadows. We're hiding this man's identity because he used to work security at the Canadian Forces base in Kandahar. He says his father and brother were killed by the Taliban, while another brother was recently found with photos of the Canadian military on his phone. He says the Taliban took him away and beat him nearly to death. Other videos shared with Global News appear to show Taliban going door to door, conducting torture and executions inside homes or in outlying areas far from the capital.
We cannot trust them because they are not trustable.
This former Canadian interpreter believes that once the Taliban achieves some international concessions, it will show its true face.
Whatever they say, it's just, they also learned politics somehow. But everybody knows the truth. They fought for 20 years. So do you really think it's going to be over? Like, it never happened? We are their enemies. They will take their revenge.
In 20 years, he says, Afghanistan has changed, but the Taliban has not. Jeff Semple, Global News, Kabul.
Still ahead, why it's taking longer and costing more to build new houses. The pandemic has sparked a frenzy in home buying. If it's a new build, don't expect to move in quickly. The Canadian Home Builders Association says the average home construction project is facing a delay of 7 weeks, and it'll cost you more. As Gaviola explains, it all comes down to supply.
Maya and Val's move into their first house was delayed several times during the pandemic. They were supposed to take possession in May, but only got the keys half a year later after the birth of their first child.
We were definitely going through some stress. Lots of emotions at play, but I guess we were kind of able to get through it.
They were lucky to be able to stay with parents while they waited for their home to be ready.
If you're going to be moving, make sure to do it before having the birth of a child. I'll say that kind of complicates things a little bit.
The Canadian Home Builders Association says this type of lengthy holdup is becoming common from coast to coast to coast.
On average, in Canada, we're seeing delays on closings of about 7 weeks. About a quarter of our members are experiencing delays of more than 9 weeks.
Supply chain snarls hit construction throughout the home building process, resulting in lengthy delays. Now, once people get into their home, there are long waits for appliances, plumbing materials, windows, bathtubs, even garage doors. To slow things down even more, there's a shortage of skilled laborers to tackle the massive backlog. The cost of raw goods is a factor too. The price of lumber hit record highs earlier this year. The housing frenzy created an historic lumber shortage. Tim Haddle's home framing business is busier than ever, but he can't hire enough people to meet all the demand.
It's a great problem to have, but it is frustrating.
He's been in the business for 2 decades and says he's never seen supply chain issues like he's seeing now.
We've had to delay some projects just because of shortages of materials. My crystal ball says about another year before we are actually back to a normal.
These extra complications come as demand for houses and more space has spiked because of the pandemic, putting additional strain on limited supply and further stoking an already hot housing market. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Up next, nothing about us without us. Youth calls for climate action. Outer space just got spicier. NASA scientists have picked the first peppers grown on the International Space Station. They're hatch chilies, a type found in New Mexico. To celebrate the harvest, one astronaut used the peppers to make what she calls her best space tacos yet. Back on Earth, world leaders have a lot on their plates during COP26 in Glasgow. The UN Climate Summit is a chance for leaders to push each other to move faster on climate action. Crystal Goomansingh reports on the young people fighting for a seat at negotiating tables.
Young people are raising up their voices and advocating for a safe, clean, livable planet. But being taken seriously is another story.
We need to stop thinking about old debates because we need a new vision for a new future. So you need to invest your time, money, and effort in us to shape our future.
More than 1 million young people have added their voices by signing a petition online by the global citizen movement Afghans. UNICEF is also calling on leaders to include young voices in the decision-making process.
There are young people who are doing very brave, direct action to show the world and show their leaders why action needs to be taken on climate change. There are young people who know every sub-clause of the Paris Agreement, who are in these negotiation spaces, who are advocating on behalf of young people.
This is Shakti Ramkumar's second COP Summit. A sustainability undergrad at UBC, she's a leader with Student Energy, an initiative aimed at speeding up the transition to renewables. And her passion is shared. According to a survey of G20 nations, Canadians have the strongest feelings that we're already in a climate emergency, both among adults and under 18s.
In Canada, it's really inspiring. You are seeing young people really say, we want climate action and we are not going to stand by until we really see it.
We've contributed disproportionately to the climate crisis. We're one of the handful of wealthy nations who have kind of taken more than our fair share of the Earth's resources, more than our fair share of the emissions in the atmosphere, and that means now we can take accountability and show some leadership.
A youth-led report will be released Thursday focusing on the energy transition and where they most feel investments should be made. Young people from 120 countries, including Canada, helped to craft it. The hope is that if young people are armed with hard data, it will add credibility to their ideas and their solutions. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, Glasgow.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday night. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, your Canada is St. Ulrich, Quebec. We would love to see your favorite parts of our country, so please keep sending your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thank you for watching. Donna Friesen will be back at the anchor desk tomorrow, and I'll see you Friday. Have a great night.